Michael found this job on a city job search site. Reading the AD on the site got him thinking. Lawrence Restaurant needs a waiter. You can be without experience. We will consider any candidate. Also suitable students of correspondence courses. Preference is given to young people up to 25 years old without bad habits. High pay is guaranteed. For more information, contact at the address below. Michael read aloud. He read it for the 5th time in a row, trying to observe what was written. And there was a lot to think about. First of all, it was the first time Michael had ever heard of a restaurant with such a name, even though he considered himself a native of the town. Secondly, why take a waiter with no experience, especially a man? Michael asked himself. From the next room came Father Spain's sign. What are you doing? Are you feeling worse again? Should I give you your pills or call the neighbor Jessica? Get her to put a dropper. Michael asked anxiously. No, son, no need. I already have a headache from these medications, replied Father Joseph. Was helpless, Michael clenched his fists. For a year, his father almost did not get out of bed, getting pain in the chest area. Doctors had their hands up in the air and said that it was all from bad ecology and cold climate. You should take your father to the sea, young man, at least for months, and maximum forever. Sunny air can do wonders, the therapist told the guy. If at that moment the doctor had only known that the guy standing in front of him was very poor, and Michael's mother died 5 years ago in a car accident, and since then they lived alone with his father. For this reason, even entering the university, the guy chose to study part-time, so he could devote more time to his sick father, study, and even earn a little extra money. After all, with each month, the money medicines went more and more. Michael had to seriously think about finding a normal job, which would cover their expenses, at least partially. Unfortunately, it was much more difficult to do this. That's why when he saw an advertisement for a waitress job, the guy stopped his attention on it. What's so special about it? I'm not going to work in a street bar. Waiter is not a bad position, by the way. Tips, clean uniforms, at least better than a janitor or a loader. Michael continued to mentally talk to himself into it. The longer he dialogued internally, the more he became convinced that he made the right choice. The next day, Michael got up early, had a quick breakfast, drank a cup of tea, and went for the job interview. Upon learning about where his son was going, the father said in farewell, "Son, you just be careful. The neighbor says that in the city there is increase in missing people. Some people are being found, but it's hard to identify them. They are so tortured and tormented." Michael shook his head, but then answered anyway, "Okay, Dad, don't worry. Who the hell needs me with no money in my pocket?" The address listed in the AD was at the very end of the town. It was a tall building with a restaurant on the first floor. There were nice tablets near the window outside. Inside, there was a nice warm light from the lamps. There was a doorman at the entrance who looked more like some pumped-up actor. Michael told him who he was and why he had come. The doorman directed him to the bar, where the director of the restaurant was. Not 5 minutes later, the future waiter was already sitting in the director's office for an interview. Mason, the owner of the establishment, looked at Michael with curiosity and said, "Well, young man, let's begin. Our restaurant opened recently, a few months ago. The staff has not been finalized, but we already have a good customer base, and most importantly, solvent. You know what I'm talking about, right? We work around the clock in 2 shifts. Night shifts are especially favored. If you happen to work the night shift, you get a double pay. At the workplace, you need to be executive and responsive. Do not ask unnecessary questions and be always on the lookout. But that's it. I think I've explained everything more than clearly." "Yes, I understand. I'm fine with the conditions. What happened to my predecessor? Why did he quit? Michael asked cautiously. The restaurant manager hesitated for a moment and then clasped his hands together and said, "He didn't quit. He was murdered. You know, there's still a killer in the city." Yeah, he was a good guy. It's a shame. They caught him in an alley and killed him. The body was disfigured beyond recognition. I can't imagine who would do something like that. His insides were scattered a few meters away, and there was no face at all. I mean, it's like stray dogs or something. After the director's words, Michael turned pale and felt his palms sweat. On the other hand, he realized how badly he needed this job. And what was the big deal about his predecessor being killed by a maniac? He could just as easily have killed anyone else in the city. It was just a coincidence and nothing more. And so, gathering his thoughts, Michael said, "I'm ready to go to work, Mr. Mason. I'm fine with that." A satisfied smile appeared on the principal's face, as if it were an order. "Well, that's great. Then I suggest you get to work right now. Put on your uniforms and let's go. Oh yeah, you can bring your housebook later. I can see you're perfectly healthy, Michael." Shaking hands with the new waiter, Mason walked him to the door. Finally have a job, Michael thought. Things will get better now, he thought on the way to the local room. In the first few hours, the job seemed easy and uncomplicated. Besides him, there were the other waiters in the restaurant who took on the most difficult orders. The first day of work turned out to be very easy and simple. Even though Michael's legs were sore from the day, it didn't spoil the experience. Could not spoil the impression that he was now employed. The night shift on the first day Michael didn't work, of course, so he went home with a clear conscience. It was still quite light outside, and it was still a couple hours before darkness fell. Breathing in the fresh evening air, the guy slowly wandered towards the center, but no sooner had he left the restaurant than he was called by a tramp who was sitting on the pavement begging for alms. "Don't pass by, give me a couple of coins or $1, asked the beggar and held out his dirty hands to Michael. The young waiter wanted to pass, but the tramp was intrusive, got up and caught up with him and blocked his way. "Take your time, listen to what I have to say. You shouldn't have gotten that restaurant job. Boy, be careful, especially at night." Michael asked in surprise, "How do you know I work in a restaurant?" But the drifter just shook his head and walked away, muttering something to himself. From the outside, it seemed that the beggar was simply out of his mind. "He's crazy," Michael thought. The guy involuntarily increased his step and hurried away from the crazy vagrant. Michael turned his attention to the flyers passed on the poles, information boards. "Help me find a missing guy, the guy who left and never came back." The headlines screamed attention, causing Michael to look around. The young waiter knew that since some time people had been disappearing in the city. Most of the victims of the mysterious maniac were young guys and girls who were the same age as Michael. Some were found torn to pieces, others disappeared without a trace. This is not a city but a maniac's playground, Michael thought, and picked up his pace. When he got home, Michael quickly told his father about his first shift and went to bed. Tomorrow would be a new day, which was surprisingly very similar to the previous day. Again, a lot of running around the restaurant, serving the guests and taking alcohol. The work was certainly not difficult, but Michael was still a little stressed, especially since on the second day of the job he noticed some oddities. As it turned out, the meat was brought to the restaurant only at night. In addition, closed dinners and banquets, for which they paid a lot of money for some reason, also took place around midnight. Strange customers. They can't eat during the day. Why is it necessary to fill their bellies at night? Michael thought to himself. He even tried to ask his partner that question, but he just shrugged his shoulders solemnly and avoided answering. But it wasn't the only thing that made Michael uneasy. The guy really did not like the beggar who was still sitting in front of the restaurant and begging for alms. It seemed to Michael that the vagrant was behaving strangely at least. Whenever the waiter left the restaurant, the beggar looked at him with all his eyes as he wanted to burn a hole in him with his gaze. Meanwhile, people continued to go missing in the city, and more missing persons notices went out. The police were inactive. People just vanished into the air. Others were found to be mangled remains. Trying to find the killer, the police were ready to blame anyone up to stray dogs, which allegedly tore the bodies of late-night passers-by to pieces. The animals were captured, of course, but the killing and missing people did not stop there. In the restaurant, meanwhile, things were going well, and Michael managed to get used to it. The only thing that upset the guy was that he persistently did not want to transfer to the night shift. That's where the pay was apparently much higher. Michael had already twice asked to leave him at night and twice received a refusal. The director reasoned that he did not have enough experience yet, and night customers liked better service and comfort. Their response from Maizana seemed as strange as possible. Something is obviously wrong here, and if I check it tonight, I will quietly come to the restaurant and see what kind of meat is brought there and what kind of customers come. Michael thought to himself and mentally made a decision. The guy was confident in the success of his idea. Michael decided to approach the restaurant not from the front entrance, but through the Venetian door, which just led him to the back door. And the sky was shining full moon, and approaching the building, the guy felt a strange excitement. And suddenly, when the restaurant was a couple of dozen steps away, Michael saw an incredible and terrifying picture. On the Venetian lot in front of the restaurant squatted someone who looked very remotely like a human being. Yes, it was a creature of some sort. Its simply sun-covered body was completely devoid of fur or any other vegetation. It was much larger than a human and was estimated to be about 10 feet tall. It had long, wiry, ape-like limbs that ended in a kind of finger-like webbing. Michael couldn't see the creature's eyes, but they were hardly more pleasant than the rest of his ugly body. The creature was sitting almost motionless, and from time to time made a slicking, slurping sound, which echoed in the nighttime silence of the wasteland for several dozen minutes. Michael, in a state of shock and bewilderment, moved to his left to get a different perspective on the creature, from a different angle, but the branch beneath his foot crunched. The creature sharply turned its head and almost immediately saw Michael frozen. Suddenly its hind legs and the young waiter realized what it was doing. Next to the creature lay part of human body, most likely a rib cage, and now, beating the night's creature's eyes, Michael realized he had to run. They broke away almost simultaneously, but unlike the boy, the creature moved in huge leaps. Michael ran in his wake, cursing himself for mistake and self-confidence. God, why did he come to this restaurant in the middle of the night? Then Michael already believed that he could escape, as suddenly he tripped on a stone lying on the road. The fall was enough to stretch on the pavement, knocking his elbows and knees into blood. The silent creature leaped onto his back, intent on eating the fresh human. But it did not have time to get its fangs as far as possible, for a man suddenly sprang out of the nearest bushes, a shotgun in his hands. He fired 2 shots at the creature. The creature dodged the first shot, but the second shot blew off half of its head. The nightmare creature roared and backed up, then bounced away, and in a second was hidden in a sewer, the lid of which was apparently missing. Breathtaking heavily, Michael got up from the ground and looked at the stranger who had saved him. Suddenly, the man's face seemed familiar to the waiter. Of course, it was the same homeless man who was begging outside the restaurant. What, do you recognize? I told you stay out of that restaurant. I'm a police officer, and I've been tracking this creature for 2 weeks now. But just today, thanks to you, I was able to get within shooting distance of him. I don't think it has a chance to survive now, the drifter said with a smile. Surprisingly, his voice no longer sounded tired or disgusted. Still not understanding what had happened, Michael looked at the drifter. He added, "It's a good thing it turned out this way, but if I hadn't been here, I think you'd be another victim of this thing. Go home, and if you need me, I'll call you to testify." Michael walked home completely confused, but he knew he would never go back to that restaurant again.